I'm going to say this once, slow and clear, because people always think I'm exaggerating when I tell this story. I warned them, in writing, 8 months before it happened. I sent the model, certified mail, signatures required. I even highlighted the flood zone in red like I was explaining it to a kid, and they still tore down the dam. And 6 weeks later, 14 homes were underwater. Not a hurricane, not some biblical storm, just a regular spring system. The kind that used to roll through that valley 4 times a year without anyone even bothering to check the forecast. And suddenly basements filled, hardwood floors buckled, and one woman, the same woman who pushed for the removal, ended up standing in her kitchen with 14 inches of water around her ankles, staring at something she had been explicitly told would happen. My name's Daniel. Well, not really, but let's keep it simple. And I've been working in hydrology for over a decade, most of that time consulting on flood control systems, drainage basins, watershed behavior, all the stuff nobody cares about until their couch starts floating. I don't raise my voice, I don't argue in circles, I build models, I document everything, and then I wait, because water doesn't lie, and eventually it proves you right or it proves you wrong. This story started with a piece of land my family had owned for over 100 years, tucked into a narrow creek valley out in rural Tennessee, or what used to be rural before developers got creative. My great-grandfather built a stone dam there back in 1909, nothing fancy, just granite blocks fitted by hand across the narrowest point of the creek. But it created a small pond that ended up doing something nobody really talked about because it worked so well. It slowed the water down. And that matters more than people think, because upstream, that creek drains thousands of acres, and when it rains hard, all that water wants to move fast, downhill, immediately. But the pond absorbed the surge, spread it out, released it gradually, turned something violent into something manageable. Now about 800 feet downstream from that dam sat a neighborhood. Let's call it Maple Ridge Estates, 60-something homes built in the mid-90s, right on what old county maps had clearly labeled as a floodplain. But for 30 years, nothing happened, no flooding, no major issues, and naturally, nobody connected that stability to the quiet, old stone structure upstream on land they didn't own and didn't think about. Enter Karen. Again, not her real name, but you'll understand the energy. She drove a white Lexus SUV, always spotless, always parked just a little crooked like she wanted you to notice it. And she had been president of the HOA for over a decade, former paralegal, extremely organized, the kind of person who doesn't raise her voice, but makes you feel like you've already lost before you even understand the argument. The first time she showed up at my property, she didn't knock like a normal person. She stood by the fence line with her arms crossed, sunglasses on, like she was inspecting something she already owned. I walked over, introduced myself, and she gave me that tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "That structure back there is becoming a concern for the community." I remember just looking at her for a second, trying to decide how much energy this conversation deserved, and I said, calmly, "It's not a structure, it's a dam, and it's been there longer than your entire subdivision." She didn't like that. You could see it in the way her jaw tightened just slightly, but she kept the tone polite, rehearsed. "Well, we'll be reviewing its impact." And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. Because here's the thing. People like Karen don't stumble into conflicts. They build them, piece by piece, document by document, until it looks official enough that everyone else just goes along with it. 2 weeks later, I got the first letter, certified mail, HOA letterhead, formal language, the whole performance, claiming my dam was an unapproved obstruction of natural water flow and therefore subject to fines. Now, just to be clear, I wasn't part of that HOA, never had been. My property predated their entire development by decades. There were no covenants tying my land to their rules. Legally speaking, they had as much authority over my dam as they did over the moon. But that didn't stop the letters. They kept coming. Different wording, same intent, pressure, escalation, repetition, $300 here, $500 there, citations that sounded official but didn't actually apply, like someone had Googled legal phrases and just started plugging them into a template. I responded to every single one, calmly, precisely, with actual legal references, property records, engineering documentation. I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was building a record. Because I'd seen this before, not on my land, but in my work, and I knew exactly what comes next when someone like Karen realizes paperwork alone isn't going to break you. She went public. HOA meetings, Facebook posts, little neighborhood gatherings where she'd stand in front of people who trusted her, and describe my dam as a deteriorating liability, a risk to the community. Even claimed it was structurally unsound, none of which was true, and I had the inspection reports to prove it. But facts don't spread as fast as fear, especially when fear comes packaged in confidence. I went to one of those meetings, sat in the back, waited my turn, stood up with my laptop, walked them through the data, explained the flow rates, the flood attenuation, showed them exactly what that dam was doing for their neighborhood every time it rained. And you know what I got? A guy in the third row, arms crossed before I even started, cut me off mid-sentence and said, "We didn't move out here to deal with some farmer's junk messing with our water." And just like that, the room shifted. Because it was never about understanding, it was about narrative, and Karen had already written hers. I remember driving home that night, hands on the wheel, going exactly the speed limit like that was somehow going to keep everything else from spiraling. And for the first time, I felt it. Not anger, not yet, but that slow, creeping realization that this wasn't going to resolve itself. This was going to get worse. So I did what I always do when things get complicated. I opened a new file. And then, I started building the model. All right, let me pause the story for a second, because this is where most people get blindsided. And it's not because they're stupid, it's because the system is designed to feel official even when it isn't. According to standard procedure, an HOA only has authority over properties that are legally bound to it, meaning your deed, your title, or a recorded covenant explicitly ties you into that association. No signature, no covenant, no jurisdiction. It's that simple on paper, but in practice, they rely on something else entirely: pressure. From a legal perspective, what Karen was doing wasn't about winning a case in court. It was about building what looks like a paper trail, stacking letters, fines, complaints, until it creates this illusion of legitimacy. And most people, when they see enough official-looking documents, they assume they're already in the wrong. And this is where it gets interesting, because this is a psychological trap. Repetition creates authority, even when there's none, and the longer it goes on, the more it drains you, financially, mentally, emotionally, until giving in starts to feel cheaper than fighting back. That's the real strategy, not enforcement, exhaustion. And once you understand that, you stop reacting emotionally, and you start documenting strategically. So yeah, once I understood the game, I stopped treating it like a disagreement and started treating it like a timeline, because timelines don't lie. And if you build them right, they tell the story for you without you ever having to raise your voice. Karen escalated in January. Not gradually, not subtly. She went straight for court. Her attorney filed a nuisance complaint, dressed it up in just enough legal language to sound serious, cited the accumulated HOA fines like they meant something, and asked the court to force removal of the dam. And when my lawyer, let's call him Greg, read it, he just leaned back in his chair and said, "This isn't about winning. This is about making it expensive for you to say no." And he was right, because from a distance, it looked legitimate. There was a filing, a case number, official stamps. But if you actually read it, really read it, there was no evidence of harm, no flood history, no structural failure, nothing you could stand on in court. Just implication, speculation, and pressure. But here's what they didn't know. I had already been working on something for months. While they were sending letters and hosting Facebook meetings, I was building a full hydrological impact model. 31 pages, rainfall scenarios, flow rates, downstream surge timing, mapped overlays showing exactly which homes would fall into the flood zone if that dam came down. Not guesses, not opinions, data. Cold, precise, repeatable. And I finished it 3 weeks before the hearing. Now around that same time, something else happened, something that shifted the entire case. I found tire tracks on my property. Fresh ones. South pasture, right along the fence line leading to the dam. And I already knew before I checked the cameras that it wasn't random. People don't accidentally drive that far into private land without a reason. The footage confirmed it. 2 men. One of them I recognized immediately. The same contractor Karen had used to call my dam unsafe months earlier. The other guy I didn't know. But they weren't sightseeing. They were measuring, photographing, walking the structure like they owned it. 22 minutes. in and out. And that wasn't the only time. I went back through the footage and found 2 more incidents over the previous year. Different dates, different vehicles, but the same pattern. HOA board members, uninvited, undocumented, crossing onto my land while actively building a legal case against me. I sent everything to Greg. Every clip, every timestamp. He called me back 2 days later, and his tone had changed. Not dramatic, just sharper. "We're not just defending anymore," he said. "We're going after them." That's when we filed the counterclaim. Trespass, interference, documentation misuse, $22,000 in damages, and suddenly the tone shifted because now it wasn't just me on defense. It was them explaining their behavior. Karen's attorney immediately asked for a delay. The judge denied it. 2 days before the hearing, they called with a settlement. And here's where it gets weird, because on paper, it looked like they were winning. The offer was simple. I remove the dam, I pay a portion of the fines, they drop the case, everyone walks away. Greg laid it out clearly. Litigation could drag on, appeals, costs, uncertainty. And he asked me the question you always get asked in that moment. "Do you want to keep fighting?" I told him I needed 48 hours. And I used those 48 hours to do one thing. I sent my model, certified mail, to their attorney, the county planning office, the state environmental department, and the Army Corps district office. 4 copies, all time-stamped, all documented, all saying the same thing without saying it out loud. "This is what's going to happen if you remove that dam." Then I called Greg back. "Tell them we accept." He paused. "You sure?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm sure." Because Karen thought removing the dam was the end of the story. I knew it was the beginning of the last chapter. The agreement was signed late March. Removal scheduled for April 9th. 11 days. That's how long I had between the decision and the outcome. So I spent those 11 days doing what I always do. I documented everything. Water levels, soil conditions, flow rates, photographs from every angle. Not emotionally, not like some goodbye ritual, just data. And every morning, I checked the weather. There was a system forming over the Gulf. Slow-moving, steady, predictable. The kind of system nobody headlines because it's not dramatic, but if you understand water, you know those are the ones that matter. April 8th, the night before removal, the forecast tightened. 3 to 5 inches of rain. Nothing extreme, just normal. And that's what made it dangerous. I sent one final email to the Army Corps. Short, factual, attached the model again. Noted the incoming system. No opinions, no warnings, just information. Then I went to bed. April 9th, 7:14 a.m. The excavator showed up right on time. The operator didn't say much. Guys like that usually don't when they know they're stepping into something bigger than the job description. He avoided eye contact, which I respected because what was there to say? I stood about 20 feet back and recorded the entire thing. Hands steady. People always ask me about that. Why I didn't stop it. Why I didn't fight harder in that moment. But by then, there was nothing left to argue. The argument had already been made. This was just the consequence playing out. It took about 4 hours. Old stone doesn't explode. It gives way, section by section, cracks forming along mortar lines that had held for over a century, each piece dropping into the creek with that dull, final sound you don't forget once you hear it. The pond started draining immediately. By the next morning, it was half gone. By day 2, it was just mud and exposed roots, like something had been peeled back that wasn't meant to be seen. I walked the basin that morning. Found some of the original foundation stones, flat, hand-cut, heavy. I loaded a few into my truck, didn't really explain it to anyone, didn't need to. That evening, I checked the forecast again. Rain was coming, faster than expected. April 15th, it started. No thunder, no drama, just steady rain, the kind that sits in the air and doesn't leave. By morning, the creek was already higher than normal. By afternoon, it was moving fast. Not because the storm was extreme, but because nothing was slowing it down anymore. The surge came through exactly like the model predicted. Unattenuated. Direct. By the morning of April 16th, the first calls started hitting the HOA maintenance line. Drains backing up, water pooling, culverts overwhelmed. By that afternoon, 6 homes had water in their basements. By the next morning, 14. 3 of them with water on the ground floor. Furniture lifted, carpets rolled. People standing in doorways trying to process how something like this could happen during what should have been a routine rain. Karen's house? 14 inches on the main floor. And here's the part people always expect me to say: I felt satisfied. I didn't. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel like I won. What I felt was something heavier than that, because none of this was unpredictable. This wasn't karma. It was math. It was physics. It was a sequence of decisions leading to an outcome that had already been mapped out in black and white. And it still happened. That's the part that stays with you. Because being right doesn't undo damage. It just means you saw it coming. By the evening of April 17th, the neighborhood Facebook page had turned into a disaster log. Photos of flooded living rooms, soaked drywall, insurance hold music playing in the background of shaky videos, and buried in the comments, someone found it. My letter. The one I sent 2 weeks before removal. They posted it. He told us. The caption said. He literally told us this would happen. And that's when everything shifted. Because now it wasn't just a flood. It was a decision. And people started asking the one question Karen couldn't answer. Why didn't you tell us? So yeah, that's where most people think the story ends. The flood, the exposure, the moment where the truth finally surfaces and everyone connects the dots. But honestly, that's just the loud part. The part people share, argue about, post online. The real story, the part that actually matters, happens after things get quiet again. Because once the water receded, once the drywall was torn out and the insurance calls slowed down, people were left with something a lot harder to deal with than flooded basements. They were left with the realization that this didn't have to happen. And that's a different kind of weight. From a legal perspective, what came next wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Investigations, liability discussions, insurance disputes, settlement negotiations, the kind of slow, methodical unwinding that doesn't make headlines but decides who pays for what, who stays, who leaves, and who quietly disappears from the narrative. Karen stepped down within a couple months. Didn't make a speech, didn't apologize publicly, just gone from the position she'd held onto for over a decade. Her house went up for sale not long after. And here's the thing people don't like to admit. The market doesn't care about your intentions, it cares about information. And now, every buyer walking into that neighborhood had access to flood data, investigation records, documented risk, and the price reflected that. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough. Enough to matter. The HOA brought in a new board, hired an actual engineering firm this time. Licensed, credentialed, the kind of people who run the same models I had already built months earlier. And the conclusion? Almost identical. Because water doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about opinions, or authority, or who won an argument at a community meeting. It follows physics every single time. And eventually, people started to understand that. Not all at once, but slowly, in conversations, in hindsight, in that quiet way people process being wrong without saying it out loud. One woman, new board president, retired schoolteacher, sent me a handwritten letter. Simple, direct, said they should have listened. I read it twice, then I filed it. Because that's what I do. Now here's where I'm going to shift this a little, because if you're listening to this thinking, okay, but that's just a crazy HOA story, you're missing the part that actually applies to you. This is a psychological trap. Not just in HOAs, not just in neighborhoods, but anywhere authority gets confused with volume. The person who talks the most, documents the least, but presents everything with confidence. That person often sets the narrative. And if you don't recognize that early, you end up reacting instead of preparing. The lesson here is, documentation beats emotion every time. You don't win these situations by arguing louder. You win by building something that holds up when the noise dies down. Because eventually, it always does. According to standard procedure, systems, legal, environmental, financial, they all move slower than people expect, but they catch up faster than people prepare for. And when they do, they don't care who seemed convincing in the moment. They care what can be proven. And that's where most people lose. Not because they're wrong, but because they didn't keep records, didn't ask the right questions, didn't realize they were in a long game instead of a short argument. And look, I'm not saying every HOA is bad, or every dispute ends like this. Most of them don't. But the pattern? That shows up everywhere. Someone assumes authority. Someone else assumes it must be valid. And the gap between those two assumptions, that's where problems start. So if you take anything from this story, take this. Pay attention when something feels official but doesn't quite make sense. Ask where the authority actually comes from. Get things in writing. Keep your own records, even when it feels unnecessary. Especially when it feels unnecessary. Because by the time it feels urgent, you're already behind. And one more thing, this part matters more than people think. Being right is not the same as being effective. I was right months before anything happened, and it didn't stop the flood. What mattered wasn't that I knew. It was that I documented, sent it, timestamped it, made sure the right people had it before the outcome played out. That's the difference between prediction and proof. And proof is what survives. So yeah, that's my story. If you've ever dealt with something like this, HOA, neighbors, zoning issues, anything where someone tried to push authority past its actual limits, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments, because I guarantee there's a version of the file in your story too, whether you realized it at the time or not. And if this hit home for you, if you got something out of it, even just a shift in how you think about situations like this, stick around. Because stories like this, they're not rare. They just don't always get documented.